Hello, everyone. Welcome to our weekly Power Lounge. This is your place to hear authentic conversations from those who have power to share. My name is Amy Vaughn, and I am the owner and Chief Empowerment Officer of Together Digital, a diverse and collaborative community of women who work in digital and choose to share their knowledge, power, and connections. You can join the movement at togetherindigital.com. And today we're going to deep dive into something that actually affects every digital initiative, but rarely gets the spotlight. And it is much deserved, and that is trust. We are joined today by Karen Douglas, who is an extraordinary digital product leader who has transformed teams at Microsoft, Cardinal Health, Anthem. You mentioned some others. What were some others you mentioned earlier to me, Karen? I want to give you the credit.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. DSW, Beauty Counter, and certainly agencies in the past as well.
Love it. So a wealth of knowledge and experience she's bringing to us today. So we're super grateful that she's here and willing to share with us how she has helped to build authentic trust that can either make or break or transform your digital transformation efforts. So get ready for some actionable insights that you all can implement immediately. Live listening audience, as always, we love that you're here with us today. Please join the conversation, add comments to the chat, add questions to the chat if you have them, and we'll be sure to come back to them once we're through with the interview. But Karen, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks so much, Amy. It's so great to be here. I really appreciate this time and this opportunity to talk about this topic. It's something that, if you'd have asked me 20 years ago, earlier on in my career, what I would be talking about at this point, I don't know that I would have said trust. But I do think it is something that, while it seems simple, is harder to implement, and it's harder to actually create in that team environment than you think. And time needs to be spent on it in order to kind of have a thriving digital team.
Yeah. And this is something you have had experience in doing, not in just, like you said, agencies, but bigger companies like tech giants, essentially, and traditional companies, where digital transformation, product, roles and responsibilities that are literally evolving as we speak. There's a lot of challenges to overcome there. What would you say, though, bringing it back to trust, what is the biggest misconception about trust in digital initiatives or even digital product?
It's a great question. I think, like we said, it seems such a simple topic, but I think the biggest misconception about trust is that it's assumed and a given with the
Yes.
team. At the beginning of an initiative, or maybe even starting a new job, we assume that everybody is on the same page and automatically trust their leaders or trust their partners. And the truth is that's just not always the case. In some cases it is, and that's wonderful if we've created those environments. But it's not given. It needs to be earned and maintained. And I truly believe that's the responsibility of all the leaders, right? It's about top down, creating an atmosphere of trust and building those relationships with the team members. If it's not fully ingrained in the culture,
Yes.
the team or the company is going to have some struggles for sure. And the thing is like I mentioned, it also has to be maintained.
Yes.
It can be lost so quickly without transparency and openness. And I think that's something that unfortunately, in my experience, in all types of companies or initiatives, I just don't think that the effort is spent there. It's more about the work and not about the trust of the team.
And I would imagine that it would be interesting if you could put like numbers to that, right? Maybe that would help open some people's eyes to the loss of like cost and productivity when you don't have trust. I mean, think about this. It doesn't even matter if you've been involved in a digital transformation project or launching a product. You still know, I think everybody that's listening right now is probably feeling exactly what you're saying, Karen, which is that like, it has to be an ongoing effort. You can never assume it. It's not a one and done. You have to maintain it. But really, how many of us have sat on the other side of initiatives, period, right? The coming down from the top without, like you said, that transparency, that understanding, that alignment of goals and objectives from the greater community that's meant to actually do the work. And then what are you going to do? You're going to go back to your desk and you're going to have a big old pitch session, right?
Yep.
About what in the heck was that? Like, why are we doing this? What actually needs to be done? So I just wonder if you could, it'd be hard to quantify, but I'm sure that
Oh
there's
gosh.
hours and money, right? Lost when you don't establish and maintain trust from the start.
Yeah, it would be fascinating if we could run some sort of study that would
Yeah.
measure that. But it's like, how many hours are the bitch sessions back at the back at the desk, or the
Uh-huh.
angry I am chats?
Yes.
When how many hours do we spend doing that? Sending the mind blowing gifts and the dumpster fires. Like, we've
Yeah.
all done it, right? Like, we've
Yep.
all sent
Guilty.
dumpster fire, like emojis and gifts and things like that, when we are not, but we don't trust what's being told
Mm-hmm.
to us, or the direction that a company is going.
Yeah.
You know, it's more than we probably think.
Yeah.
It's a great point. It would probably be mind blowing how much
Mm-hmm.
time is spent, which, that's the point, right? If we focus at least even a percentage of that time
Mm-hmm.
on building that trust and relationships with our leaders and our team members, our
Mm-hmm.
cross-functional partners, our direct reports,
Yeah.
anyone really, it would just, that the work would be more valuable, and that work would move forward more rapidly, and
Mm-hmm.
with happier, more
Yes.
content employees, right? Which also then reduces
Absolutely.
turnover. It,
Mm-hmm.
it's the cycle, right?
Right. Because then the training and getting them onboarded and back up to speed. Yeah. All that time, all
Hmm.
that money getting lost. What might be,
Absolutely.
you've definitely mentioned like transparency. Do you have any other like strategies, tactics, or good takeaways for our listeners to kind of, when you're launching an initiative, what are some ways in which you can begin to kind of open up the door and allow for opportunity to build and gain trust?
Yeah, I think, transparency, I think, is probably the key. I think, from a leadership perspective,
Hmm.
being open and honest, even when mistakes happen, is pretty critical.
Yes. I love that.
Coming with humility, coming with honesty, providing updates. Don't leave your team in the dark.
Hmm.
They're just sitting there wondering what the next step is, especially in the past few years where technology has been, and the market has been volatile.
Yeah.
Everyone's sitting there wondering whether or not they're going to have a job tomorrow. Be open with
Exactly.
them. Tell them
Hmm.
what's going on. Tell them about the initiative and why we need to move forward with it. Give them a reason to believe in
Yes.
what's happening. Open the conversation up. Ask the tough questions and expect to answer them.
Hmm.
And I think that's sort of on everyone, really, is we need to be open enough
Hmm.
to not be afraid and avoid the difficult questions that may
Hmm.
come from our team, or our cross-functional partners, or our direct reports, or even our leaders, right?
Yeah.
Don't avoid it.
Yeah.
Your team knows when you're doing it.
Right? I mean, yeah, we sometimes think we're getting away with something, but
We're
really,
not.
if
We're not
you
getting
could
away
see
with
the
anything.
DMs, you would know otherwise. I love
Yeah.
this because I do think, and I agree, it's in this kind of market, especially within our industry, creating and establishing psychological safety for the sake of being able to let people be creative and as innovative and as productive as you want them to be is really hard. So I think right now leaders should be leaning in even harder this time to kind of establish and make that. One thing I learned from somebody, and I think it might have been one of our past podcast episodes, where somebody had offered up the advice of don't give everything to your team as a done deal. Don't say,
Mm.
here's the project, here are the goals, here's the objectives, here are the timelines, and then just say, this is what it is. Like, actually give them stuff that, because sometimes I feel like by doing that, I'm setting them up for success. I'm helping them. All the details have been thought of. But depending on the type of person that you're working with, and the majority of people, especially, they're going to look at it and say, I had no contribution to this. I had no skin in the
Mm.
game here. I wasn't consulted on any of this. And so they were like, bring things that are actually unfinished and give them opportunities to engage, to contribute, because then buy-in's real, because it's like they've contributed, they've put something towards it. So they're more likely to follow through than if everything's just a done deal every time it comes to them.
Absolutely. I think, as a leader in the digital product space, yes, I've led teams, I've led large initiatives, I've done a lot of things. However, I know, and I have always told the people that are working with me, for me,
Hmm.
cross functionally, I know I'm not the smartest person in the room all the time.
Yeah.
The best ideas come from the collective voice of the team. So, to
Hmm.
what you're saying, Amy, don't come in with a fully baked plan.
Hmm.
Leverage the experts that you have around you. And that way you've got the buy-in, the collective buy-in
Yeah.
from the group, and everyone understands that we're all in this together, and this was our idea. This was our initiative.
Yes.
This was our plan,
Hmm.
right? And then the flip side to that is then give credit where credit's due.
Yes. 100%,
If it's your
Karen.
idea, Amy, I'm going to make sure everybody knows that it was Amy's
Absolutely.
idea. And I think that is so incredibly important. And that is a huge thing that I think sometimes is missing,
Oh, 100%.
to help develop the trust of the team.
Hmm. Oh, absolutely. Because when somebody is up there and they're speaking to the work that you did and they don't give credit, it just feels like they are taking credit because they are the ones presenting, which, whew,
Right.
I've heard, seen, and felt that an awful lot. And it just
Absolutely.
occurred to me too as you were talking. It's just like it's so easy, right, to let our own concern for our self image and perfectionism get in the way of our ability to be good leaders. And if you can kind of start to let those things go, you're modeling something really good for your team, whether you believe it or not. And then I think a lot of it does help lead to trust. And then I think it takes the pressure off you as a leader to show up perfect and, infallible
Exactly.
every time because you're just not that. That's a lot of work and effort on top of your job leading. So let it go, you know? I'm
That's
not
right.
saying like don't try, but it's like stop trying to be perfect every time. It's not the right image you want to put out there to the people that you want to gain and maintain their trust.
No, you're 100% right. I completely agree with that.
Well, let's get into some storytelling, which we always love here in the Power Lounge. I was hoping you could maybe share a story or a time when the lack of trust kind of derailed a project, and if and how you were able to turn that around.
Yeah, unfortunately, there's probably multiple examples I
Right.
could come up with, as I'm sure anyone who's listening probably is thinking of the examples right now. The one thing that I think I'll talk about an example of when I first started at a company. Um, a culture of distrust. Well, and actually, I think, how you don't always know what you're walking into, whether it be with a new team or a new initiative or a new company. You can ask the culture questions all you want in an
Yeah.
interview or something like that, but until you're there, you don't really know what culture you're stepping into, and that can be really difficult.
Hmm.
Um, so, my advice is don't come in guns blazing and think you've got the answer for everything. However, the example I want to talk through is, I walked into an environment where a culture of distrust was really already in place with the digital product team, which I then was leading, um, the tech team and engineering team, with this particular stakeholder group. Um, I had to kind of dive into that. And what I really found out was they just felt like whatever they wanted to get done, technically launched, just was not a priority, and that no one cared and it was never going to happen. And so, I needed to dig into that because, of course, I'm on the engineering team, extended
Hmm.
engineering team. So I can't, like really bash the team that I just joined.
Yeah.
But so what I chose to do was spend more time with them and
Hmm.
really dig into their business, their expectations, their customer base, their user base, and what their leadership expectations were on them. Because the truth is all of these different stakeholder groups have accountabilities and responsibilities to their leaders.
Hmm.
And they might be completely in conflict with what I think they should be
Yes.
or
Uh
my
huh.
team thinks they should be. And so that's kind of what I found out. So what I did and my team did is we started to really focus and spend time with them. We did a couple of things. We first started with beefing up our communication, right? Recurring meetings, trying to get to know them, understanding them, asking them questions, asking them for information, and then also making sure that when we're communicating, we were giving them the full view of the work that was happening in engineering, right? So
Right.
that they could get the fact that it wasn't that there was nothing happening, right? No one's
Exactly.
sitting on their hands doing nothing.
Uh-huh.
We needed to educate them about what was happening so that they could start to see what was really happening. Um, as far as education, not only were we educating them on what was really happening, but I also recognized that we needed to educate them on really the process of digital development.
Yes.
And it's interesting. We were talking before we jumped on this podcast in the digital product space. It's no matter where I've worked, and I've worked at some giants and ones that you wouldn't expect
Hmm.
to be this way, but they still don't totally understand what digital product is.
Yeah.
After being one of the first ones to have that title years ago to now, it's the same. Whether you go into a small company or a large company or a consulting opportunity,
Hmm.
there's still an education that needs to happen about the role of digital product and what the development process really is like.
Hmm.
So we spent a lot of time explaining that, helping them understand what we were there to do and that we were there to help them. And really, simple things. How long does something take to build? What does our
Yeah.
infrastructure look like? Are we able to even do the thing you're asking for right now? Or do
Hmm.
10 things have to happen before it?
Yeah.
Right? And that helped them understand that it wasn't that they were being ignored. It's just it couldn't happen right now for
Yeah.
whatever reason.
Hmm.
Right. And then the third thing we did, so it was like we communicated and we educated, and then we helped with prioritization,
Love it.
which is the job of digital product, right? It's to
Yeah.
help prioritize and help those stakeholders prioritize what is the most important and why, right?
Hmm.
What is the data that we have? What is our user base telling us we need to do right now? What is going to move the needle? Are there some small quick wins that we can get out the door? And how does all that play with everything else that's on the plate of the engineering team, right?
Right.
And so I would have to ask them point blank, what's your number one?
Hmm.
And well, we want to do this now. Well, which things push down? And we'd have to
Yeah.
have those really hard conversations. You cannot have 10 number ones, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
And so over time, and to be honest, this isn't rocket science. This is
Hmm.
just stuff that has to be done to develop the relationship, develop the trust, and to help people understand where you're coming from. Um, and, with that process, which by the way was not overnight, it was
Right.
months. Like
Yeah, I'm
this
sure.
isn't something that is in an hour conversation you can take care of. It is months of consistency. Um, and when they can count on you and they know how to reach you and they can ask you questions, we were able to start to be hyper focused on what the biggest bang for our buck was when it
Yep.
came to helping them move their needle.
Hmm.
And I then was able to advocate on their behalf with the rest of the engineering team to say, hey, hold on, this is going to drive X amount of dollars. This is going to drive X amount of impressions. This is going to
Hmm.
drive X amount of revenue.
Yeah.
Um, and by helping build those relationships, we were able to get some things out the door and they were thrilled. It had been a
Yeah.
year since one of their initiatives had actually hit the market
Right.
and we were able to do it. It took about 4 months,
Hmm.
I would say. But that was huge for them. And
Right.
then it's success. And then I built their trust.
Hmm.
And then they started seeing how we were going to chip away at their goals.
I love it. Yeah, I can see how prioritization could definitely be the thing that helps move the business and the needle forward. Because if you've got people scurrying in all directions and everything's the priority, nothing becomes the priority, right?
Absolutely.
And then everybody
Absolutely.
gets blamed for the lack of results. But it's like if you do slow your roll and you allow for the education and all of that, then what opens up is the chance for you to look really good, on the other side of it because you're listening to your people and you're understanding their advice because I think it's always a good indicator when you get that sense of, and if you're like working on your EQ as a leader, it doesn't take a whole lot to know it, to see it, to feel it. But on the other side of that fear, frustration, or hesitation when it comes to your team, the other side of that is understanding. And so I think that's where you're right, like education. And I think all of the marketers listening to this call, they know they live this right every
For sure.
day. You have to constantly educate. Yes. Okay. I know you want a 10-page social media strategy with key performance indicators and an ideal customer profile audience and paid media strategy by tomorrow. However, I need to be able to do these things. I need to pull this research and be able to kind of pull all that together. So, it's kind of, sometimes I think it seems daunting to have to educate, but I'm like, if you don't speak up and advocate for yourself, who will? And then all of a sudden the idea becomes that all of these things are done quickly and without much effort. And then the assumption gets made that that can always be the case. And then you have burnout and people leaving. And again, we're just falling into the same pitfalls
Yep.
over and over and over again. I did
Yeah.
want to jump ahead to one of our questions because I think it ties nicely to your answer for the last, and that's stakeholders. Right. We've talked a lot about team alignment, but then we've got the stakeholders to consider and building their trust as well. I think some of the things you were talking about, so I just wanted to reemphasize some of those points and see if you had other points you wanted to add on how do you maintain transparency while managing the expectations during complex digital transformations with those stakeholders. So not just your team, but the people that are sitting above you going, we want our numbers, we want our results.
Yeah, I think it's exactly what we were just talking about.
Mm-hmm.
It is, regular upfronts, updates, being upfront, being transparent, being open. As they say, bad news does not get better with age. So you have to bring the challenges up and out as soon as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Don't be afraid to do it. It is part of the job, right? And I think even that, even bringing up the bad things or the things that are going to be behind or that we might miss a deadline, it's
Mm-hmm.
still about trust, right? Because then
Yeah.
you can come at them and just tell them the truth. And here's the
Mm-hmm.
plan that we've got going on, or hey, I need your help to help solve this problem. Like that is totally fine. When you keep it to yourself, that's when
Yeah.
you lose the trust.
Mm-hmm.
So I think other than that, I think just to reiterate it, I think as a digital product professional, and probably this applies to your point to all marketers, unfortunately, we will always be educating, like whether you like it or not. That's
Right?
just kind of how it is.
Yeah.
And so I think having, be prepared for that. If you have some materials that you want to use to help educate, if you have, a one pager or something that you
Mm-hmm.
want to share, if you have, and every company is a little bit different, right? So the processes, while we all think we're agile, we're all at different parts of that journey. And I think it's important to educate how the processes that your organization work
Yeah.
and also be open to feedback when
Yes.
those processes can be improved or
Mm-hmm.
that communication can be improved. So yeah, it's asking the hard questions of the stakeholders and not being afraid if they provide
Yes.
you a critique.
Mm-hmm.
Um, take that as an opportunity to
Mm-hmm.
just make it better and look for what they need. And it's not always
Yes.
a one size fits all.
No.
Um, Sometimes you have to evolve to your C-suite or to your direct reports or to your cross-functional team to find the meeting cadence and the conversation cadence or
Mm-hmm.
timeline or all of that works best for the team. Just be
Yeah.
flexible.
Yeah. Yeah. I think those routine type of team check-ins, one-on-ones, all that stuff is so, so critical. And I think sometimes in the
Yeah.
busyness of the day-to-day, we tend to deprioritize that. But I think that's a really easy door to kind of, leave open and then start having trust walk right out with it.
Yeah,
And I love what
for
you said at the
sure.
beginning there too. I think there's a mindset shift for some of us that, yeah, it is your job as the subject matter expert, as the product expert to point out the obstacles, the barriers, the
Mhm.
potential non-desirable outcomes, the issues. Like that is part of you doing your job. I think sometimes we think we have to be all sunshine and rainbows and happy news and everything's going perfect. And not to say you need to like be a negative Nelly and point out every possible issue, but it's like, think ahead and be proactive where you can. And then when kind of stuff hits the fan, like be that person who's brave enough to step up before, like you said, don't let it get bad news doesn't get old, doesn't age well. So don't let it just sit there. Cause then you're going to come to them and they're going to be like, why didn't you tell us this sooner?
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah.
that's the
Yeah.
worst.
Yeah. Now, on the flip side to that, and this goes back to leadership has the responsibility of building trust.
Hmm.
There has to be an open enough relationship
Yes, that's a great
that
point.
because I do know, and I have worked in environments like this in the past where
Yep.
you're afraid to give the bad news, right?
Oh, yeah.
You have a leader who
Hmm.
might not accept that. And the truth is
Yeah.
that's a problem. that is a cultural
Hmm.
issue that needs to be
Yeah.
addressed at that company,
Right.
or in that team
Hmm.
potentially, because you do need to be able to feel comfortable to go share the bad news.
Yes.
In
Hmm.
most cases, most leaders
That's a
I've worked
great
with
point.
are have always said, "Bring it to me right away."
Yeah.
But there have been
Oh,
a
yeah.
few in
Oh,
my
100%.
experience, or even just in observation of others,
Hmm.
that there's a fear
Hmm.
in giving giving the bad news.
Yeah. No, I agree.
And to be honest, if you run into that, call them out. You
Right.
need to call out your leaders
I love that.
on that,
Yeah.
and ask for support from other team members,
Hmm. To
because
back
that's not
you
fair.
up.
Yeah,
Well, because yeah, and then my thought was as you were describing that again, all very familiar sounding. It's for me. It's at one point I kind of just came to the understanding that that was more of a them problem than a me problem. Like if I can't
hmm
come to you with honest feedback about something critical to the business and the business success, because if my only goal and objective is for us to succeed as a business. And I'm bringing value and equity to the company while probably getting paid peanuts compared to what that equity is, then I just it might not be the right kind of fit or culture for me.
that's
So
right.
I always did do well with leaders that had that kind of open door, open mind policy to because it wasn't like I was going to ever bring something just to bring something.
No,
It was
no,
always because I knew it was a tried and true issue that needed to be addressed or have a conversation about. So I agree with you. There is definitely a lot of that fear just based on certain leadership styles. I think because it's
yeah.
like but then
The
what
majority
expect
are
you
not
to
that way, but
yeah,
just to say,
it's
like,
evolving.
it is hard to give bad news sometimes, but the truth
Sure.
is if you've worked on those relationships,
Hmm.
it should be easy,
Right,
really.
you're like
Like,
help
I mean,
like
hard to say it, but easy to
right,
do it,
exactly.
because you built that relationship.
Hmm. Definitely. Let's talk about cross-functional teams. Those are really an important aspect of building trust and relationships. It's really critical. I'm kind of curious, Karen, how are you seeing this and how are you approaching this now that we are in this world of remote and hybrid?
Yeah, it's a great question. I've had the opportunity to work remotely for almost 8 years now.
Hmm.
So before it was popular, and so this took me some time to understand, really, because I was definitely the person who loved to chat, and build relationships in
Yeah.
person. I like people telling me I have cute shoes and a bunch of things like that, and you don't get that, right?
Yeah.
When you're remotely and things like that. So,
Mm.
um, I think the obvious answer is we have all these digital tools. Like the super obvious part is use your IM, use your email, use your Zoom calls, do all
Yep.
of that, right? That's the obvious answer. But where I see other opportunities is really um, around spending time with your cross functional teams.
Hmm.
We cannot underestimate the power of getting to know each other personally,
Yep.
period. Full stop. It is so incredibly powerful. We when effort is spent on actually building relationships, we break down the work walls,
Yep.
right? And start to work together as human beings instead of
Hmm.
coworkers. And
Yes.
that is hugely valuable.
Agreed.
In remote and hybrid environment, this can look like all kinds of things. It could be one-on-ones, it could be whatever. It could be literally just stopping the conversation altogether because someone mentioned something and forgetting about work for your scheduled Zoom call. Imagine
Hmm.
that, right?
Yeah.
We're always so focused and we go from next call to next call to next call. And yes, we have work to do. And yes, we're all time crunched. And yes, it's all important, but it's not more important than asking someone about their weekend or understanding what's
Yes.
happening in their family life or
Hmm.
finding something that you have in common with them that you are then sharing, things that you found online that they might enjoy and getting to know them personally. So
Hmm. Yeah.
in my mind, it's always, always, always should be people first, building relationships, and the trust and the work will follow.
I love that. Yeah. I like that. Treating people as human beings, not human doings.
Yeah.
I even catch myself. I mean, I really try hard to be intentional about like when I start a meeting, I want the first 5 minutes to just kind of be,
Yep.
I really want to know how
Schedule a
you're
longer
doing.
meeting.
right? We try so hard to be like, okay, it's not a 30-minute, it's a 25-minute. It's like, no, just make it 30 and spend 5 minutes checking in with each
Mm-hmm.
other. And then even, it
Mm-hmm.
sounds crazy, but it's even the little things, because I am very much like, okay, move on things, quick, 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 task, 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 that I'll be reaching out to somebody and I always have to go back. I'll write out the thing that I need. And then I go back and add like, how are you today? And a little bit of a
Yes.
personal statement after the fact, because it's always something that I'm like, okay, I don't need to just, even if it's a Slack message,
Yeah.
something as quick as that, I still try to slow down and make sure I say, hi, how are you? And like mean how really I want to know how you were doing. you know,
Yes, like legitimately
the
care
way
about how
you
you're
ask
doing.
those things, even that can always be tweaked or made more efficient. So, for those of you who
Yeah.
are in leadership positions or managing others, it really doesn't, you don't have to move mountains to be effective at this. It really is nuancing and looking at the ways in which you're communicating with your team currently. And just finding more ways to be personable and human and, yeah, acknowledge what they've got going on inside their life and outside of life. Because one of the things I heard from a really great mentor of mine. He said a lot of times with people when they're struggling, right? If you have somebody on, say, a performance review, which is never fun when you're having to deal with that, he says it's either skill, hill, or will.
Mm.
And skill is obviously they don't have the skills needed to sort of accomplish the task that's been given to them. Um, Hill is the fact that, like, okay, there could be something going on. So usually, like, I kind of come at this when I'm struggling with somebody to say, like, okay, do you have what you need? Do you know what actually needs to be done? Is this clear to you? Do you have the tools? Do you know how to use the tools? And then the other is the hill, and the hill sometimes is personal. You
Mm-hmm.
might not know it, but they've got a dog that's like having to go into the vet every day. That's basically a part of the family. And they're distressed and doing and dealing with that, especially in our remote world, right? Because we are multitasking and dealing with things with home
Mm-hmm.
and life all at the same
Yes.
time at work as well, which was it not before so much the case. And then the last one is Will. And he's like, that's really sometimes the last kind of straw that breaks the camel's back. Oftentimes it's like, that's something that you sometimes can't get from them because they just don't have the motivation to do it. But if you can unearth the skill and the hill and get those both solved, then really it's just a matter of will from there. And I love that framing. So I wanted to get back and share it. I think I might have shared it before on a podcast, but
No, I think
for
that's
cross
great. I
functional
love
teams
that.
too, it's really, really helpful.
Yeah, it's so it seems so simple, right? Spend time with people.
Mm-hmm.
But we don't. We don't. We have these deadlines, we have all these things, and
Yeah.
yes, they're real. But like we talked about earlier, if we could just take all the time where of the angry DMs
right.
and water cooler conversations complaining about,
Mm-hmm.
and we
The
could
rage
take that
lunches.
time and turn it into building those relationships with people, just imagine what we could do to the bottom line and to the culture and to like work life balance or everything else, or in just overall job satisfaction for individuals. And you can't tell me that there aren't like financial benefits
Mm-hmm.
to doing that. So take the
Yes.
time,
Mm-hmm.
make it a priority,
Right.
set up
Again.
one-on-ones that have nothing to do with work.
Right. I wish we could quantify that again too, to just
I
help people
know.
really truly understand from the top down stakeholders and all that that really needs to be the case and that there are results behind those efforts. It's not just, and I think we're starting to get there with like, it's not just soft skills. These are skills, period, that are essential in leadership and communication and managing teams. On that note, do you have a framework for helping people create psychological safety within teams, especially when you're kind of pushing an innovative solutions and or dealing with everything we just talked about, right? Everything else happening in the world.
Yeah. It's interesting that psychological safety, I have a different perspective, I think, than some, or maybe not. I think psychological safety, the whole concept of psychological safety is really the responsibility and accountability of both leaders
Mhm.
and individual contributors.
Yes. Hmm.
I think, of course, as leaders, we, our teams deserve um, to be able to have open dialogue with us. We need to, as I mentioned earlier, we need to welcome, not avoid the tough questions and challenges. Of course, be transparent, like we talked about earlier as well. And your team is well aware when you're not. They can tell when you're
Mhm.
withholding information. Of course, there's things that you aren't able to share, things like that, but then tell them that. Just say it that I'm unable to tell you at this time. I promise you when I can, I will. Let
Mhm.
them know.
Yeah.
Um, I think time spent, as we've been talking about, on building those relationships helps to build that psychological safety. And if we've done the groundwork of spending time, getting to know people, creating open dialogue, being transparent, giving credit where credit was due, and we've done all these other things we've already discussed, I don't think psychological safety will be an issue.
Mhm.
It's not, because you've created that culture of trust by just doing those other things.
Mhm.
Now, on the flip side, as I mentioned, I think it's also the responsibility of the individual contributor. There is a point that where leaders do and are asked to make really tough decisions,
Yeah.
and they're not always popular,
Mhm.
right? And it might be exactly what you don't want them to do, but they're in that position for a reason and they're being
Mhm.
asked to do those things. So again, if you have that foundation of the relationship and the trust,
Yeah.
you've got to give them cut them a little bit of slack
Mhm.
in that, recognize who it's coming from, why it's coming from them,
Mhm.
and that they're in this position and they have to make these decisions. So to me, as an individual contributor,
Mhm.
if I have that relationship with my leader
Right.
or team, and as long as those decisions are not unethical,
Right.
at some point we need to just get the work done
Mhm.
too.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
think that the concept of psychological safety, um, is like I said,
Yeah.
it's more than just a leadership problem.
Oh, yes.
It's
It's a
a
two-way street.
whole conversation around
Mhm.
the trust and all of that,
Yeah.
and then at some point understanding that leaders have to be leaders sometimes,
Yes.
and it's
And
not
that
easy.
right. And I think that's where leaders showing up in a vulnerable way, in a more
That's right.
transparent way, serves them well when they have to sit down and have those difficult conversations.
That's
So,
right.
for
Admit your
example,
mistakes.
yeah, exactly. Because there's certain things that it's 100% that's out of their control. And it's like, definitely had those leaders that have been that they've been authentic, they've been transparent in a way that is still like professional, but helpful and
Hmm.
supportive. And it has allowed us to get through really difficult situations and scenarios. And for me, being on the receiving end of some of the negative side effects of those scenarios, I walked away mad at one less person. Like, it's like when you get bad news, that's all you need is to have more angst, more anger, more
Yeah.
anxiety over one person. So I think, again, like, as a leader, having led a lot of teams, I have just really found giving them an appropriate peek behind the curtain to some things and being like, I don't always have the answers. I don't always have the final say. And true honesty is so
Yep.
much easier than
Exactly.
trying to pretend I have all this authority that I don't, so that when things come down the line and I really, maybe I've advocated, because that's just who I am. I've
Right. Mama
advocated and I've
bear.
said the
Yeah.
things, but like at the end of the day, I didn't win, and this is what it's going to be. And that's not easy. But then that to me just feels better, and like, okay, I get it, and I can get behind that. I'm not going to love it, but I know you're not loving it either. And I think that that's
Hmm.
really, really helpful, in the way of, of just creating a space for psychological safety. I don't think we have to be accountable for anybody else's psychological safety per se. I'm kind of with you on that.
Correct.
I think it's
Yeah.
more about creating that space to allow for it, because even
Yeah.
still, like, you have to think about the fact that people are coming with baggage and past experiences and trauma. So you can create all the psychological safety you want as a leader. That doesn't mean they're still going to be able to show up in that
Hmm.
way. It's going to take time, energy, effort, maybe a little bit of digging even. And that's where I also think managers and leaders, especially leaders of innovation that maybe kind of frightens people, I think that's where, um, just the vulnerability as a leader actually comes into play to help you be stronger as such. Because it's like, instead of people being fearful of you every time you want to come and talk to them, they're just like, oh, yeah, no big deal. All right, let's talk about what the thing is.
Yeah. Yeah, and I've had lots of experiences with that, both where I received the news I didn't want to hear,
Hmm.
and where I had to deliver news that I knew wasn't going to be popular. And it's hard. It's
Yeah.
hard. I think you said something earlier. As long as your team knows that you're advocating,
Yeah.
I think that's important,
Hmm.
right? They need to know that you're behind them as
Yeah.
leader. and you've
Mhm.
got their back. I have been called Mama Bear in the past.
Yeah.
I take it as a
So you relate.
huge compliment,
Uh-huh.
because I think that's my job as a leader. And
Yes.
I always look for leaders that are going to treat me that way, that are going to advocate for me and
Mhm.
speak up for me and remind people that I have value, right? Or
Yes.
that I have good ideas, just
Mhm.
like I want to do with my team. Like we talked about giving credit where credit is due.
Yes.
Um, I think that's important. I think if you have that trust, that to your point, even when you have to deliver the bad message, they know it's not you,
Mhm.
right? And they know
Yeah.
it might just be budget. It might just be tough times, or it might just
Uh-huh.
be a no, not right now. It might be coming from a board member. Who knows what it's coming from, right? A
Yeah.
million other reasons.
Mhm.
Um, they know it's not you. They know you
Right.
tried. They know you gave it your best effort.
Mhm.
It still
Right.
stinks when you have
Right.
to deliver those messages that people don't want to hear. But then I think you can also be vulnerable and say, you know what? I agree. I
Yeah.
wish that this was different. I wish the situation had played out differently, but
Mhm.
it didn't. And
Right.
here's where we are. And we
Because
have
then
a
you're
choice to make
acknowledging
now.
it, right? Yeah,
Yeah,
you're not sweeping it under the rug. You're not diminishing their feelings or the
that's
outcome
right.
of what's being done. You are acknowledging that in full. And like you said, trust is such a two-way street. Creating psychological safety for one another is a two-way street. And I have to say, outside of just getting your business goals and objectives done and making money and hitting metrics, like all that's important, but there's longevity to this too. It just reminded me of when we had a mass amount of layoffs at one of our agencies, and
Mm.
I had forgotten that I had done this. And when I tell people, they're like, "Of course you did that, Amy." One of the C-suite guys came out of one of the rooms, the huddles where they were doing the layoffs, and he just was a wreck,
Mm.
just looked miserable. And I just walked up and I guess I gave him a hug and I said, "Are you okay? Do you need anything?" And it was years later. And he tells me that you did this. He's like, "I don't know if you remember doing this, but you did this for me. And I have never forgotten." And I kid you not, this person has supported this organization. He has supported other initiatives for minorities and things like that. Like, he has used his privilege, to show up and has been a great supporter and even friend to me since then. And it was just one small little moment that I honestly barely remember. That,
Yeah,
again, when you show up even with a little bit of creating psychological safety for your own coworkers, even your leaders sometimes,
even
and
your
being that
leaders.
safe space for them, pays off in the long run. Because at the end of the
Yes,
day,
it
we're
does.
not just this one job, we're not just this one role, right?
Yeah,
We're building
absolutely.
relationships.
Yeah, I love that story. And you're right. You were probably in the thick of your own blur in that situation.
Yeah,
And
it was
then just to,
chaos.
again, that humanness, that remembering that people are still humans at the end
Hmm.
of the day.
Yeah.
Um, people first,
Hmm.
always,
Yeah. He was like, "That
you
was the
know,
worst day of my life." He's like, "Worst day." He's like, "But that really helped me in that moment because, I still a wreck for the rest of the day, the week, the month, however long." But he's like, "I never want to have to go through that again." But he's like, "It really did make a difference." So yeah, just
it's awesome.
don't be shy about showing up, even for your leaders, because sometimes they forget they're human too. And I
That's
think for
right.
me, that was a really good way to get through even some of my most challenging and most difficult, either whether it was a cross functional team member or another team member or a leader. Um, it's just kind of creating that psychological safety for them as well. Again, I think we do ask for it a lot as employees, but you've
Yeah,
got some to offer as well.
that's right. Good point. Good reminder.
Fantastic. Yeah. All right. I would love to hear a little bit more about your unique perspective on turning small wins into enterprise-wide impact, because you've worked at some big places, as we've mentioned already.
Yeah.
I'd love for you to talk us through a little bit of your approach there.
Yeah, we've touched on it a little bit, but I think turning small wins into enterprise impact, it all goes back to what we've been saying. My foundation is always in this build relationship, give credit where credit is due. I think the number one thing we can do as leaders is brag about our team, promote the
Yes.
small wins
Hmm.
across the organization, give credit where credit is due, and recognize the hard work and the efforts of the team early and often. Even if the work is relatively small,
Hmm.
it's still important to celebrate it. When we do that, we not only energize our team and make them feel good, which will then encourage them to go do more, better work, but we also promote the team in a way to the organization so that the organization will then have trust in us,
Yeah.
right? So if we can prove to the organization in a digital product perspective, that we can launch something small, maybe then the cool work will follow,
Yep.
right? The cool work will follow because we all
Mm,
want to do the cool work.
right.
Um, and we'll be trusted with that bigger initiative because we've proven the small wins.
Mm,
So the small wins have a huge impact to the overall larger initiatives
mm-hmm.
because again, the team is tested, proven, and then all of a sudden we get into a rhythm,
Mm-hmm.
and then here you go. Their new cool initiative gets funded, and
Right.
there's confidence across the organization and the team that you can do it.
I love it. That is fantastic. Such a good reminder because I think, yeah, it's true. We just kind of move from one small initiative to the next small to the next big. And we never really slow down to take a moment and celebrate, and creating those moments of celebration reinforce the positive, right? It sounds silly, but like
Yeah.
if anybody's here raising kids, like punishment and fear and all of that kind of stuff. A lot of us were raised that way. And
Mm-hmm.
it worked to a degree, but it didn't substantiate trust. It didn't necessarily create better outcomes. But by kind of building up these wins for your team, it's building momentum and giving them the
Mm-hmm.
opportunity to show up and shine and be their best selves. One thing I learned, I was at a company where when I first started, they asked me what my love language was. And I was like, you what? What's a love language? I didn't even know at the time. And I wanted to know, well, why? I was like, I'll definitely take the test and I'll tell you, but I'm curious as to why. And they said, because that's how we like to make sure we recognize people. We had
Mm-hmm.
one guy in particular, like words of affirmation was not his jam. Like it really put him in an uncomfortable position. But then some of us who the whole idea of love languages, if you're not familiar, is that we often give love in the way in which we like to receive it. However, certain people don't always receive in the same way. So it's things like words of affirmation, physical touch, gifts, acts of service, and what's the other one? Oh, quality time. Look at me. I remembered all five.
Very good.
And so knowing what your team's individual love languages are actually could translate into how you acknowledge the things that they're doing at work, the ways in which you might celebrate the wins.
That's
Because I
right.
knew never to make a public admirations about Stephen because he would literally be in the corner in a ball huddled up, like fetal position. Like, just please stop talking about me.
Yeah.
It was really more, let's the two of us go hang out and have lunch together or
Yes.
buy him a small gift, so kind of knowing those individual things will, I think, even take what you just said, which is brilliant, that kind of celebrating the small wins to the next level, not just for your whole team but on an individual level as well.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's a great connection to love languages. I'm very familiar.
Yeah.
And you're right. And in a virtual world, it's trickier, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so not everybody wants the Slack message with all the little emojis next to it. So
Yeah.
that's saying congratulations or celebrate, right? So that's a really good point to make.
Mm-hmm.
It becomes a little bit more tricky because you
Mm-hmm.
don't have access or quick access
Yeah.
to all of those. So you have to get creative. Maybe it's
Mm-hmm.
sending a digital gift card, right?
Yeah.
And
Mm-hmm.
that's enough. But I think you're right. You've got to get to know and invest in your team and kind of understand what it is that
Yeah.
they like and appreciate. And again, I think those small wins, it just the kudos in whatever way is necessary are it just again creates an environment where they want to be there.
Mm-hmm.
They know that they're respected and they're
Yeah.
appreciated.
Mm-hmm.
And again, bigger things can come from that.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I had a boss when I worked all through college, and I did so much for that office. And it was so funny because he was not the kind of person who ever said thank you. And I wouldn't say that I'm really high on words of affirmation, but I think at the time I certainly was. And with that job, it was something that I needed more of, because I remember being blindsided when I left school, and he like offered to like double my salary to stay once I finished school. And I'm like, but do you even like me working here? Because I had no verbal affirmations whatsoever for him for 3 years. All of a sudden he's
You're
like,
like, oh,
let's go to breakfast. Let's talk about you staying. And I'm like, but I just went through 3 years of school to get out of here. But if you would have been working all along and understood
that's
and
right.
known what I needed and the ways of affirmation that I was doing a good job, then maybe I'd have been ready to say I would consider staying. But it was just so out of
Yeah,
the blue. I'm
out of
like,
the blue.
who is this person? What
Yeah,
do you
kind of
want?
missed the mark on that. Had an opportunity that whole time. Right.
But yeah, it was funny. It was a good scenario there. And yeah, no, he was fun to work for still, regardless. But all right, how do you balance the need for rapid iteration with building trust, that constant tension of deadlines, timelines, and then all of these nuanced things we're kind of talking about in building trust?
Oh gosh. To me, this is easy. It's stop moving the goalposts. Just
Mm-hmm.
stop. Establish clear goals and priorities from the top down.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, we talked about earlier. You can't have 10 number ones.
Yeah.
And while there's nothing, in my opinion, nothing derails a team
Mm-hmm.
or reduces the trust more than constant change.
Yes.
I mean, it's just not something, we're a lot of us are type A's and we're planners and we're organizers and we map out what we think our next month is going to look like for work. And then to have it flipped on its head and have to recreate the wheel 10 times
Yeah.
really destroys the trust. So, like I said, that's a leadership challenge, right?
Yep.
It's all the C-suite or the decision makers
Mm-hmm.
aligned. If they're
Yeah.
not, stop, get aligned, and
Mm-hmm.
then come back to the team. Don't let the team sit in that swirl.
Yeah.
Because that's what I mean by stop moving the goalposts, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because the deadlines can't keep shifting, the scope can't keep getting bigger. And again, I'm probably preaching to everybody who's listening because we've all lived this, but it really does affect the trust,
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
and you're going to slow things down, not speed things up,
Mm-hmm.
because
Yeah.
you have to replan and reorganize over and over and over and over again. And no
Yep.
actual good work gets out the door.
Yeah. Should be on a t-shirt. Stop moving the goalposts.
Oh
That's a soundbite,
gosh.
by the way.
Yes.
Post-production team right there. That was like solid gold there. That little like 15 seconds. It's so true. It's such a simple answer. But sometimes it doesn't seem that simple, but it is. It's so very true. The more the dynamics and the change, it's just like because again, right? Then all of a sudden you're just like, you start working towards a new direction and then you're like, well, what's the
Yeah.
point of working so hard on
Yeah.
this? Because I know in 5 minutes it's going to
It's going
change
to
again.
change. Yeah. Yep.
So
Exactly.
true.
And it's not and no one wants to feel, or, I don't want to feel,
Hmm.
like I'm not accomplishing something.
Yeah.
And I think when that happens, and frequently, it just creates that environment where nothing ever gets done.
Yeah.
And it's a
It almost seems like a
common,
joke after a while, right?
yes, it's common, unfortunately, in
Yeah.
digital product. And
Uh-huh.
so this is near and dear to my heart.
Yes.
And I feel this to the core when I talk
Mm,
about it. But really, it goes back to, what's your company's strategy? What do you want to be when you grow up? What do
yeah.
you want to do in the next 6 to 12 months? Right? Like, what's your target?
Hmm.
What customer base are you going after? What market do you want to enter into? I mean,
Yes.
there's a million questions, right?
Hmm.
What are our users need? How do we increase revenue in this way? Instead of trying to boil the ocean, because when we boil the
Right.
ocean as leaders,
Hmm.
that's when the goalposts change.
Yep. Yep.
And you need a C-suite or a leadership group or a board
Hmm.
who's all aligned to the same goals.
Yeah. No, I love that. That could be a whole nother hour, right? I
It
guess.
is. Like, I can feel
Don't
it in my
move the
chest. Like, I'm
goalpost.
like, yes.
Oh, because yeah, it does. It becomes a joke. People don't take things as seriously. It's the boy who cried
Exactly.
wolf in business form and building
Hmm.
products.
Hmm. Exactly. Exactly. And like that
uh,
applies to anything, right? Marketing
yeah.
campaigns and anything,
Hmm.
right? Stop moving the
No.
goalposts.
No, I love it. That's great.
I mean,
All right.
I mean, within reason, of course, there are some pivots that are required, right? Market
Sure.
shifts, and some, look,
Hmm.
we have example in California right now that there's
You give
there's fires happening.
context.
Something's gonna have to change and
Right.
drop
Hmm.
because something catastrophic is happening, or something huge market shift is happening. So of course, there's always those exceptions, but
Yeah.
most of the time, they're just exceptions, not the
Yeah.
rule.
No, I love that. And you said there, it's a great example. Give context. Again,
Yes,
context and clarity, more transparency to why it's okay. Yeah, the post is moving, but here's why.
that's
You're going
right.
to get better alignment, better reaction. People might not be happy, but at least they have an understanding going in as to what happened and why, especially if it's
That's
out of
right.
anyone else's control. All right, let's see. Okay, this wouldn't be a marketing and product conversation without bringing up AI, of course. So I was curious to hear from you. What role does trust play in AI implementation and adoption? Because that's a struggle for some people in different places and organizations.
Yeah, it's funny. In digital, every few years we have a new trend, right?
Mm-hmm.
It was, responsive design at one point. I'm dating
Yep.
myself. Omnichannel, transformation, like all these things, right, are the buzzwords, and that it's AI, right? And we know
Mm-hmm.
that. And believe me, I use AI in my personal life and my
Yeah.
professional life almost daily. I mean, it definitely makes life easier. It's awesome. But coming from a digital product perspective, I will say we need to ask ourselves, or continue to ask ourselves, what problem are we trying to solve with
Mm-hmm.
AI,
Yes.
right? Regardless, we tend to get all wrapped up in the new hotness and the new shiny object of the
Yep.
day. And that's what AI is right now. And again,
Sure.
awesome. But let's go back to our fundamental roots of how we solve things for our users,
Mm-hmm.
right? What are the problems the users are seeing? What does our current data tell us that AI is going to help with? What problem are
Mm-hmm.
we trying to solve?
Right.
Can our current infrastructure even support it? I mean, I have seen and have been part of
Yeah.
organizations who think, oh, I'll just build AI and I'll just
It'll
bolt it
solve
onto
all
what
the
I've got right
problems.
now. But the truth
Yep.
is it's not going to happen, because there's a whole foundation that needs to be built before we can implement it, right?
Yep.
Um, are there bigger pain points that we should be addressing with our
Mm-hmm.
customers or our users first?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Because yes, it's cool, but if our fundamental e-commerce site, for example, or digital app, whatever experience isn't even at par,
Mm-hmm.
why are we talking about AI?
Exactly.
Right? Like, I think before insisting that the team go off and build these things,
Mm-hmm.
let's, like, just because it's the new cool thing,
Yep.
let's make sure that we're focused and we have the strategy behind it.
Mm-hmm.
That the data and the strategy are front and center. And then it will make the team, it will create the trust within the team, right?
Absolutely.
The just because
Mm-hmm.
answer, because everybody's doing it,
Yeah.
isn't going to cut it
It's not a good
for
use
the
of
team's
time.
perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And we talked about earlier, not being the smartest in the room. Listen to your experts
Mm-hmm.
about what needs to be put in place prior, or where you might want to focus some efforts, or
Yeah.
parallel path, right?
Mm-hmm.
Fix the foundation and focus
Yeah.
on innovation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, do some of those things together. But
Mm,
that's kind of
I
my
love it.
perspective. Is
Mm-hmm.
is I think it is not going away, but I think
Yeah.
we need to be smart about it and make
Mm-hmm.
sure that we're really tackling the right problem
Yeah.
with
Agreed.
it.
It's kind of like getting a titanium and cool gripped handled hammer and being like, take this and go build a sandcastle with it because it's the new tool that everybody's using.
That's it, right? Like, calm down, everyone. Let's make
Right?
sure we're doing the right thing. Not saying that it's going away, or
Yeah.
or that it shouldn't be part of the roadmap,
Mm-hmm.
right? It might
Yeah.
need to be,
Yeah.
but let's make sure we're focused on the strategy, not just
Exactly.
going
The
to build
right
it
tool
just
for the right
because.
problem. Yeah, I
Mm-hmm.
agree. All
Mm-hmm.
right, we've got just a few minutes left, so I want to give a nudge to our live listening audience to see if you all have any questions. Please feel free to drop them in the chat. I see that you guys have been having some conversations, so we love seeing that as well. While we're waiting to see if any other questions come through, Karen, I would love for you to give us a quick snapshot of how you work to rebuild trust after maybe a failed digital product launch or initiative.
I think we talked about it a little bit. It's acknowledging what went wrong. It's
Mm-hmm.
coming in as a leader with humility and transparency, and communicating openly to the team or to the executives or to whoever about what didn't go according to plan. And then spending time
Mm-hmm.
after the fact to focus on, sort of that post-mortem. What are the lessons learned? And how do we take concrete next steps to ensure that we improve the processes or the
Yeah.
deployment or whatever, in the future? How do we make sure we don't run into those same issues in the future? I think you
Mm-hmm.
just have to be honest and
Yeah.
truthful.
I love that. It also reminded me, I'm such a quotes gal. I read a quote recently that was Nelson Mandela that I want to put in my 7-year-old's room because he's such a perfectionist. And we've talked about like failing fast and failing forward and all of that. But it was, I never lose. I only win or learn something. And
Mm,
I was like, I love that mentality. I kind of want to put it everywhere right now.
yeah,
Because again, all of the pressures that we have coming on us as, at work, at home, and life in general, it's just, we've just really got to find a way to embrace that idea of it's not necessarily a failure. It's not a reason to stop and quit. It's a reason to learn something. So
I love
love
that.
it.
Great quote.
Right? It's a good one. Like I said, I love
Hmm.
a good quote. Awesome. All right. Well, I didn't see any questions come through from our live listening audience. We've got like just a minute left, so we'll see if we can squeeze in this one last question. What is one trust building exercise or practice that you wish you had known about earlier in your career?
Yeah, this is a whole personal reflection moment. I honestly think simplicity is learning how to listen first. When you're coming
Mm-hmm.
into a new organization, a new team, new project, new initiative, whatever, we cannot assume that all of our past experiences are going to apply. I'm sure some of them will. That's why
Mm-hmm.
you're there. That's why you were brought to that project or that team. Um, but we need to spend time, sometimes even months,
Mm-hmm.
meeting people, asking them about their day to day, trying to understand their goals, their challenges, getting to know them personally, like we talked about before, all before coming in and trying to change the world. And that is
Yes.
hard when we instinctually, and as someone who's been doing this for a while, I instinctually often
Mm-hmm.
know what to go fix,
Yeah.
but I can't go in and fix it day one.
Yeah.
I need
No.
to spend the time and the effort to truly understand the players, the people, the goals and objectives.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's what I wish I had known
Mm-hmm.
early in my career. I think I've learned that through trial and error, quite honestly. And
Yes.
so that's what I would recommend.
I love that because it is true. I think the take, and I always loved being like the new kid on the block, right? And then being able to play that card of like, well, I'm new here, so I don't really know, because you have to investigate and understand before you can start to make, to advise, because I think you need to really prove that you've done your time in the research to know that you're speaking from a place of, understanding. Otherwise, you're just going to be keep bringing to the table things that you're going to be told, we've done that. This is already happening. And so
Mm-hmm.
it looks kind of like you're just running around shooting off ideas without having taken the time to get the foundation down and understand
Yep.
what's there and what's being done currently. And it can be, again, it can be a factor of breaking trust, because then you're like, well, are you looking at the things? Are you reading the things? Are you doing the things? So yeah, I think being an investigator when you come into those kinds of spaces, and making recommendations for innovation and changes. I agree. I've always tried to make sure I'm like, dot my I's, cross my T's, because I don't want to come up and
Yeah.
be like, look, I have this great idea. And they're like, yeah, we tried it and it failed. And
Yes.
there's all kinds of
Yes.
documentation about it for you that we shared with you, but you didn't look at it. I was like, oh, my
Yes, yes,
bad.
yes. And there will come a time where you can come in and make those recommendations. There
Yes.
will. It will come.
Yes.
It just might
Yes.
not be right away.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be
I
patient
love
for it.
that.
And
Stay
that's definitely something,
curious.
yeah, for sure.
Wonderful. Well, Karen, thank you so much. This was such a wonderful conversation. I hope all of you got as much out of it as we did. It was really great. Like, again, as you're speaking, you're giving me so many thoughts and ideas and bringing back a lot of memories and things that we have to all work through, and kind of just knowing that trust is a paramount factor in moving the needle forward in kind of all things business, life, you name it. You've given us some really great takeaways today. So thank you for that.
Oh, thank you, Amy. It's a pleasure to be here. I could talk about this for hours. So thank you for giving me some time today with you. It's been
Absolutely. And
great.
we'll be talking more soon. Karen is going to be at our Columbus event, talking about partnerships on January 22nd. So if you're listening and you're in the Columbus area, be sure to hop on over and check out that fantastic event, along with our Cohatch partners. Karen will be there with a couple other speakers. So excited to hear about how that goes, Karen. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you again.
All right, everyone. Hopefully, you can join us next week. Until then, everyone, keep asking, keep giving, and keep growing. We'll see you all later. Bye.
Produced by Heartcast Media.